Just as we predicted on yesterday's show, the Sean Manaea signing did not mean that the Giants were out on starting pitchers. And today we learned that they have signed Ross Stripling, who had a really good year for the Toronto Blue Jays last year. Giants have signed him to that same contract Manaea got. So we'll get into what it is and what it means next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, Giants have made another signing. They, in the span of 2 days here, have signed Sean Manaea and Ross Stripling to identical $25 million deals over 2 years with an opt-out after the first year. So yesterday we got into mailbag questions, and I realized I didn't even mention the contract itself. So 2 years, $25 million with an opt-out. And at least for Stripling, I think the Manaea deal hasn't officially been announced yet. But with Stripling, at least, it's backloaded, as was Mitch Haniger's contract. So it is really interesting. This is not something that they've done really in the past, but it is something they've done this offseason, especially in Haniger's deal. It's like $11 million in the first year and then like 17-ish the next couple years. And with Stripling, they're paying him $10 million in 2023 and $15 million in 2024 if he chooses not to opt out. And so what are they getting in these two pitchers in Manaea and Stripling, and what is the state of their rotation, and does this officially mean they're out on Carlos Rodón? Well, it's kind of become a running joke, but no, Susan Slusser still reporting that the Giants are in fact still in on Rodón. And while I don't know that I believe that, and some of you are 100% certain that it's not true, the way that it might be true is if they really planned on making a trade out of their rotation depth, or if there was more of an injury concern with certain guys like Anthony DeSclafani and or Alex Wood than we know about. And so, yes, with Stripling, let's just talk about him first because this is the newest signing. What he did in Toronto last year was extremely impressive. It's not a great place to pitch. It's a really tough division. And Stripling had a 3.01 earned run average in 134 and a third innings. He had a 3.57 expected ERA, a 3.11 fielding independent pitching. So just really solid numbers across the board. It is worth pointing out that this came in 32 games, but only 24 starts. And so in his career, he's played in 204 games, and only 104 of those are starts. You know Stripling probably from his time with the Dodgers, where he started his career. He pitched in LA for parts of 5 seasons, and it reminds me a lot of Alex Wood in that they moved him in and out of the rotation during his time there. And I think that given that the Giants now have so many starting pitchers with Logan Webb, Alex Cobb, Sean Manaea, Anthony DeSclafani, Alex Wood, Ross Stripling, Jakob Junis, like they've got a lot of guys. And so you might wonder, how does this work? And I just want to point out that I think it was last offseason at some point, the Giants were talking about how they don't really view their pitching staff as like a 5-man rotation. They view it more as we need to cover this number of innings throughout the course of the year, and how are we going to spread those innings around? And so when you view it from that lens, it makes a little more sense when you've got like 8 guys who you might think of as starting pitchers. I could see them piggybacking certain pairs of these two, like for example, Alex Wood and Anthony DeSclafani, because Wood had those problems going through an order a third time, and if you look historically at his numbers going through a batting order a third time, it's not so good. And so if you can pair 2 guys together on a given day, save the bullpen for the most part on that day, we could be looking at that kind of way they attack these innings. Like I said, they're not viewing it per se as a 5-man rotation. It's kind of I don't want to call it like the next wave of thinking, but it's just another way of thinking about putting together a pitching staff. And so I think Stripling, like when I was looking through Ross Stripling's numbers, he is a guy who also in his career has had some problems the third time through the order. Now, historically, it's worth mentioning that all pitchers, generally speaking, have this problem. But with Stripling, I actually don't know if it's like worse than the league average. That's something I wanted to look at. If we look at times through the order from 2016 through 2022 for all pitchers in the league, the first time through the order, they have a weighted on base average against them of 310. And the second time through the order for the league average from 2016 is 324, the weighted on base average, which is scaled to league average on base percentage. So around 315 or so overall is league average. So first time 310, second time 324, third time through the order 336 weighted on base average. And so you can see it gets worse every time you go through the order on average. And for Stripling, the career numbers four times through the order. The first time 296 weighted on base average, so better than league average. The second time he's at 309, which is like the league average first time through the order. And for the third time through the order, though, for Stripling, it's at 340, the weighted on base average, and the league average is 336. So he actually, does worse than the average player in terms of that third time through the order penalty. And so I would not be surprised. Like I said, if you think of it more, they're imagining that Stripling is not necessarily a guy they're going to want to have go through the order 3 times. It starts to make more sense having this kind of depth of a rotation. And so while it doesn't, this rotation without Carlos Rodón, and he's still a free agent, so he's still in play technically, and I don't have Sean Manaea's times through the order numbers pulled up, but it is noteworthy they essentially got the exact same deal. But this is a rotation that is... It's hard for me to say it's like much worse than last year's because it's gotten longer and deeper. But at the same time, going from Rodón to Stripling and Manaea is a step back. But then you have to factor in Kyle Harrison, and he's the big wild card here. Kyle Harrison, stud prospect starting pitcher. And I really do believe Farhan Zaidi has said that they think that he's going to factor into the team in a big way in 2023, maybe even early in the season. And so if you view Kyle Harrison as having that front of the rotation type upside, which he does have, and you go Webb, Harrison, Cobb, who quietly was really, really good for the Giants. If you look at the underlying metrics, with better defense behind him, Cobb legitimately was excellent. The ERA wasn't excellent, but everything else suggested he was like Kevin Gausman type performance under the hood at when Gausman was at his best. And I get it, Cobb is older is what I'm trying to say there, but the ground ball rate, the strikeout rate, just command of the strike zone, I think Cobb is wildly underrated. And with Webb and Harrison and Cobb, and then all the length after that with Manaea and Stripling and DeSclafani and Wood and Junis, it has the potential to be a really good starting rotation for the Giants. And we'll see if they're not done. Slusser saying that they're still in on Rodón. And if they were, I would imagine at that point a trade would be likely and or somebody is more injured than we know about. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to turn our attention to getting into some more mailbag questions. Specifically, there's more questions about the distrust of the front office and the offseason that the Giants are having. So we'll get to those questions in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by SimpliSafe. At Locked On Giants, we believe home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, SimpliSafe. And right now, SimpliSafe is offering Locked On Giants listeners 40% off a new security system. But don't put this off. I use it and I love it very much. It has made my life so much more relaxing, especially when I'm not at the house and I'm able to check in at any time using the easy-to-use app. Not all the apps for these types of services are easy to use, but SimpliSafe gets it done in a major way, and being able to just check in on those HD security cameras anytime is just tremendous peace of mind for me. SimpliSafe was rated Best Home Security System of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report, the 3rd year in a row. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 40% off any new system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, as promised, we are going to get into some mailbag questions. I hope I thoroughly covered the Ross Stripling deal. In the larger context, I think people want to know, like, is this it? And I think that we're going to get to in these questions and kind of relate the signing to the offseason as a whole. Thanks for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. So yes, in the larger context of the offseason, just getting into some questions. David says the criticism of the front office has gone to ridiculous levels. What do you think it will take to truly shift the narrative? A lot of fans I see on social media act like the Giants are the Pirates or some other consistently bad franchise. What changes this narrative? It could change with some major additions in the offseason that is still ongoing. A lot of the questions and reaction to basically a week, right? Like going into the winter meetings, almost no major free agents had signed. And then there was a flurry of activity. And then all of a sudden, understandably, because fans were really hopeful for Aaron Judge and they don't get him. And then a bunch of other names fall off the board. But there are some other good ones left. I mean, if they were to sign Carlos Correa, then I think that would go a long way to truly changing the narrative. There are some questions coming up about how some don't think Correa even like moves the needle enough. But I mean, he, as we discussed yesterday, in my opinion, was the second best free agent in this class. And so, yeah, you didn't get the first best in Judge, but if you got the second best and you lengthened out the depth of that starting rotation, which is an important and good quality to have, and I don't think they're done. I think bullpen moves are still going to happen. They still want to add another outfielder. So the rest of the offseason could certainly go a long way, and it would start with Correa. If they don't get Correa, if they don't get Rodón, then the only real way to make impactful moves would be probably through trades. And I'm not a huge fan of that because, yes, you'd be getting potentially really good players, but also you'd be sacrificing something that's not just cold hard cash. You'd be sacrificing prospect capital, although you could buy players potentially by taking on bad contracts. That's still in play. So a lot of offseason left in order to change the narrative. But I also think an important part of changing the narrative here is going to be having some prospects come up to the major leagues in upcoming seasons, like specifically this upcoming season. If Kyle Harrison comes up and just pitches like some believe he is capable of, and that's essentially a frontline type arm, that would go a long way. And a position player, if Casey Schmidt proves his worth, if David Villar has a breakout season, if you start to have some young homegrown players really truly break through and look like good major league players, you know, who are under club control for a lot of years and are young, and fans, those are the guys that fans fall in love with the most. I mean, think about the Giants teams in the last decade plus that you fell in love with the most, and the players, it was the homegrown guys. Lincecum, Kane, Bumgarner, Posey, Sandoval. Like, these are the guys that fans truly form a bond with. Webb is kind of the best example right now, and Doval. But imagine if you had those guys kind of churning through on a consistent basis. I think a lot of the tension would ease down a little bit if you started to have some lovable homegrown stars, and it could happen. And also a Webb extension. I think that extending Webb would be a great way to spend some money this offseason that would be just extraordinarily popular. And so there's a lot of things they can do. The offseason is young still. It is only December 13th. And I think that there's a lot of ways that they can continue to build goodwill with the fans, but they've got a long way to go. Next question from Sean, who says, yes, I got two questions. Does the front office / ownership enjoy being hated by their fan base? Serious question, because they don't seem serious about fielding a contender. Do they understand they're losing the fan base even with a Correa signing? I know lots of people who are boycotting this year. So this is kind of what I meant when I am saying, where is this? This is a little bit over the top. So it touches on the first question about the criticism going to ridiculous levels. I really think, I mean, if they get Correa, people are boycotting. That just doesn't make any sense to me. You're free to do whatever you want. I got no problem with that. If you want to boycott them, go ahead. More power to you, seriously. But it just doesn't make any sense to me. The Correa is the second best free agent in this class. He's going to command likely a $300+ million contract. They tried to sign the best player in this class. They gave him the contract that ultimately he took from another team who matched what the Giants were offering. And it was his own team and the Yankees. And so, look, at the end of the day, it just was apparent that if Judge got the Yankees to go to the level that any other team was willing to go to, they were going to get him back. And so, I don't know. I just don't see that. And they don't seem serious about fielding a contender. I think that they do. They do seem serious. And the idea, like in the first question, that they're operating like the Pirates or something is just completely bogus. Because if you look at the Pirates, like seriously look at the Pirates, they made a signing of Carlos Santana earlier in the offseason. It was like $6 million. And it was their largest free agent signing in like 6 seasons, a $6 million deal. And so this is not the Giants at all. If anything, they're operating more like a mid-market team as opposed to the Mets. Look at the Dodgers offseason. They have barely spent, the only signing they've really made is Clayton Kershaw for $20 million. And so Giants come in second right now in spending in the division behind the Padres, but they've committed like $120 or so million at this point. And so it's nothing close to what the Pirates are doing. And also, the offseason is quite young, as I keep saying, and so they don't seem serious about fielding a contender. They literally tried to sign Aaron Judge, and that was like a week ago that he didn't choose the Giants. And so I just don't know that we can say that, and that Correa would actually be a very strong pivot. And I don't think they would even be done if they signed a Correa. They still are looking for bullpen help and an outfielder. And so there's, like I said, a lot of time to make themselves a pretty good team. And so we shall see what transpires. Next question from Bay Area Fam, who says, what are options to fill the center field hole after missing on Nimmo and Judge? And CJ says, thoughts on potential trade targets to get a true center fielder, Kepler, Siri, one of the D-backs young 3 outfielders. And so, yeah, the outfield market in free agency is not so good at this point. And so when we're talking about who are the options after missing on Nimmo and Judge, if you're looking at the free agent class, it's just not necessarily such a great thing. Like when I pull up here the guys who are still unsigned, who are outfielders, Brandon Drury, Andrew Benintendi, Jurickson Profar, David Peralta. It's just not a particularly great group of outfielders. There is Joey Gallo, there is AJ Pollock, there is somebody else who I found interesting as I scroll through. Brett Phillips, really good defender, but just can't hit a lick, which is what people think Kevin Kiermaier is, but Kiermaier can actually be a decent hitter. And I don't know, there just aren't a lot of great options. Most of the guys I just mentioned are not center fielders. And so if they truly want a elite or just really good defensive center fielder, they may need to go to the trade market at this point. Max Kepler is like kind of like Yastrzemski. I think he's, if I had to pull a direct comp for Kepler, it'd probably be Yaz. And like fringe in center, or at least like somewhat good in center, but not great, but much better in the corners and more of a platoon bat. And so I'm not sure that that's the way to go with Kepler. Siri, they had Jose Siri and then they let him go. I like the Diamondbacks outfielders, CJ. I like Alec Thomas and I like Jake McCarthy. Brian Reynolds is out there, but he's not a great defender in center. Ramon Laureano is out there, but he's not necessarily as good of a defender as you think in center. So there are some options, but it's not the greatest and deepest position anymore. So for me, it's the D-backs outfielders. Also, I like Dylan Carlson on the St. Louis Cardinals if he were to be made available. Local guy too, and they seem to like those guys quite a bit. Coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. Why are the Giants so darn quiet and insist on low-level deals? We'll address the low-level deals, including these two for Manaea and Stripling, in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline. And hey, also MLB offseason stuff. And as we looked yesterday, guess who's the favorites according to BetOnline to sign Carlos Correa? It is the Giants. Yes, they were also the favorites on Aaron Judge, but there's just a lot. You can kind of read the tea leaves of the market by looking at these odds. The Giants are the slight favorites ahead of the Twins. The Yankees are in the mix. The Cubs and Red Sox also in that mix as well. Hopefully we get some resolution soon. But if you believe he's not going to the Giants or is going to the Giants, these are some of the opportunities you can check out at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, as promised, we are going to get to some more mailbag questions. Caleb says, why, oh why, are they so darn quiet and insist on low-level deals? I believe this was before the Sean Manaea deal, and certainly this was before the Ross Stripling deal. And so it's just an example of what I was saying yesterday when I said the offseason is young. It is December 12th. A lot of times, teams don't even have any moves done by December 12th. And so the fact that the Giants had signed Mitch Haniger and brought back Jock Peterson, and that was maybe it before you asked this question. First of all, they're not loud in terms of letting things leak. Like, did you hear any rumors about, I'll keep saying this every time, and hopefully it can internalize this, that there weren't really any rumors connecting them to Ross Stripling. There was no John Heyman, or, maybe he's not the best example to ever give Giants fans again, but, Ken Rosenthal or Jeff Passan saying, oh, we're hearing that the Giants are talking to Ross Stripling. None of it. It just said the Giants have signed Ross Stripling. And so they are very tight-lipped. And so just because you don't hear anything doesn't mean you know what's going on behind the scenes. And insisting on low-level deals, they offered Aaron Judge $40 million a year over 9 years, which would have been, and was, because it's what he took from the Yankees, the largest free agent contract in Major League history and the highest average annual value ever given to a position player in the sport. So that's just not true that they insist on low-level deals. I understand your point. What have they actually signed people to? Low-level deals. And so it's also just hard to land these big fish. Like, there's competition for them, and each individual player is different in terms of why have they not come to the Giants. I mean, they tried again, like, I wouldn't say they insist on it. They tried to sign Bryce Harper. I'm going to keep saying the Stanton one is not fair because that was a trade and the Marlins agreed to it, and Stanton had a no trade clause and he said no. It wasn't about not being able to sign him. It was a trade and it was agreed to and he rejected it. And Ohtani, he got a MLB minimum salary for his first. He got a rookie contract, 3 years of pre-arbitration, 3 years of arbitration. And so it wasn't about money at all. It was more about the Angels had the DH spot and he wanted to be able to DH and not have to play the outfield. And so I don't know. I get what you mean. Why have they only signed guys to low-level deals? But for starting pitchers, why do they insist on these shorter deals? It's because if you look at, I believe it's because if you look at the history of long-term deals for starting pitchers, they often don't go well, including in Giants history. They have some very notable examples with Barry Zito and Johnny Cueto and Jeff Samardzija, just a few examples there. And they've had quite a lot of success doing what they do with starting pitchers. And so it's hard to fault them on the starting pitcher end. I think position player-wise, I believe, you've got to just push the envelope, force the issue, and ideally, in my opinion, go and get Carlos Correa kind of no matter what it takes. I think it would be worth it. Even if the back of the contract is a problem, it would be worth the multiple, 5 prime years you'd be getting from Correa, who does have some injury concerns in his career. But hey, I think just to get the ball rolling, it would be worth it. So we'll see. We'll see if they do it again in terms of not landing major free agents this offseason. There are very few left, with Correa and Rodón and Dansby Swanson being the headliners. Next question from Bay Area Fam, who says, would it even be wise to trade our top prospects, as Farhan said, to catch up to the Dodgers? The Giants need to hit on prospects. I don't think that it really would be, but it might become necessary if they miss on, Aaron Judge, which they already did, and if they miss on Carlos Correa, which we don't even really know how seriously they're pursuing him because of what I said. They're really, really close to the vest with their interest in players. And so we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. But if they don't land Correa, and they obviously didn't land Judge, how else are they going to make their team better and a playoff contender? I mean, Farhan Zaidi said the goal is to be just an obvious playoff team going into the season. And right now they're not there yet. I think that they're better than most people give them credit for. Some of the questions I got here are like over under 81 wins. How about, are they going to lose 95 or 105, which I just think is ridiculous at this stage, honestly. But I think someone like Marco Luciano could be on the trade block, but I do believe it's got to be the right player. If you're willing to give up a Marco Luciano, I would prefer that you get someone who has 6 years of team control remaining. So not someone who's more of a shorter term player like Brian Reynolds. I just don't think it would be wise to give up a top prospect who's 21 years old. I get it. He's kind of been inconsistent and had some back issues, which is a big red flag. But if you trade that potential for 3 years of a player, that concerns me. But if you're getting, I don't know, not that this would actually get it done, but if you were getting Dalton Varsho and his 5 or 6 years of team control, I think that could make more sense for the Giants, and they just have to kind of scour the market and see what's out there in terms of a fit. But if they don't come away with the talent that they hope to in free agency, I think Luciano could be on the block. But there's also questions about, do you trade him for Devers, who's a 1-year player coming out of Boston, 1 year before free agency? I think it's an easy no on trading a guy like Luciano, who's a long-term solution potentially, for a short-term solution. That's what they did with Andrew McCutchen. That's how they lost Brian Reynolds in the first place. So it'd be different if you could extend Devers, yeah. But still, are they in a position where that's a great idea? Not necessarily. And they need their farm system to start producing major league talent who are everyday players and potentially stars. They need that. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.